everyone. Welcome to our latest episode of the Zero Hiccup podcast. And today we have a guest from Boston, Krikor, representing electives.io. Hi, Krikor. How are you doing?
Hi, Ayush. Doing great. Good to be here. Thank you very much for the invite.
Yes, very pleasure, in fact, because I was really looking forward to meet you, Krikor, given the fantastic things you're building. So, for the audience, would you like to give a bit of background currently? What makes you busy? What are you up to? And how you are looking forward to the next 1 year.
Yeah, certainly. As Ayush was saying, we started the company with a friend of mine about 2.5 years ago. The company is called Electives.io, and we are life learning for the enterprises. That's the problem that we're solving. So to date, we have about 160 teachers on our platform and over 450 unique classes. And we work with over 100 enterprises. Those companies can work with us to find what is the right learning content for their teams. And we handle all of the logistics, really all of the class delivery, pre and post class content and engagement with the learners. I focus on the product and engineering side of the business. And we have some very exciting initiatives that are currently in flight.
Great. So talking about product engineering, I know it's always a challenge to set up the right team practices and set up the right combinations, get the best out of the team, and so on. So, Kiko, what are your personal hacks towards developer productivity and make your team, get the best, basically get the best out of them, and the team basically creating the best work out of themselves?
Certainly. So we have a very holistic view towards velocity. So when we talk about velocity, we try to really think about from a product perspective of what is the scope of really the initiative that we're building on. Are there creative ways to lower that scope in order to reduce the time to market, which is ultimately what matters? We are a startup. We're trying some new things that other companies haven't tried before. And really seeking that user validation and learning is extremely important. That is the goal for us. The question is constantly, how can we minimize that time to market so we validate and learn much faster? So to me, it all starts with the scope of what we're releasing. Once we figure out what is the MVP or the next level after MVP, then we start executing. Now, in those MVP discussions, we try to involve engineering. It's not just a product management conversation. Creative ideas come from all parts of the organization, and developers are extremely creative, so we involve them pretty early on. Once we narrow down the scope to what we believe is the minimal thing that we can release and validate our assumptions, then we start building. And that's where we see a lot of things that can improve or hamper the development velocity. One of those things is really the development experience of, do we have the right architecture that allows multiple teams to be collaborating effectively, or are they forced to step on each other's toes? For example, a microservices architecture lends itself a lot better to a scalable organization where you can leverage more teams at the same time, versus a monolithic architecture is a lot harder in that respect. Another thing that we look at is what is the day in the life of a developer? For example, what are the tasks that I need to do in order to get my own environment up to speed where I can really start making some of the changes? In companies where I used to work, I have seen both good and bad examples. In certain cases, it would take almost a week to set up your development environment before you're able to really start being productive. And in other companies, that's a much shorter time. We try to bring that time close to zero, as possible, just so developers don't waste time with maintaining and creating these environments, but rather are working towards new features and creating value. In terms of our philosophy around releases, so we do give a lot of freedom to the developers to push all the way to production. Of course, that comes with certain responsibilities around following our process. We do have a very thorough code review process. There is an important quality gate in the release process. We have a lot of test automation along the way. We have a staging environment where everything needs to be tested, of course, before going to production. But for the most part, our philosophy is free up the developers, allow them to go all the way to production, and that really produces very high velocity. So I'm touching on just a few high-level things. Happy to dig into any of those, Ayush. So please let me know where you want me to focus.
Sure, sure. So I would definitely like you to expand more about, the tools specifically, or because you mentioned about, automating the deployment and stuff. So what kind of tool, and for code review especially, like what kind of
Yeah.
tools do you use or practices? And if possible, if in hindsight you can recall any example, like life before that thing and life after that thing. So something that must have changed in your team. So if you can recollect any, I know I'm putting you into a strange question, but yeah, if you can recollect anything, please do share.
Yeah, certainly. So let me maybe start with some of an exploration of the hosting environment that we use, and then I'll come to the more development tools side of the question. So our preference is, so when we look at developer velocity, we try to analyze how are we spending our time. And our time is not just writing the code, but it also releasing it and then supporting it in production. So we do have a DevOps model. And if we had a very complex infrastructure that we manage ourselves, then obviously that will take a lot of our support cycles. So because of that, we do favor serverless type of technology. We are hosted in AWS, so we use DynamoDB, we use Lambda, we use other serverless, just managed services that free us up from all of that management overhead. This is our preference. As much as possible, we go in that direction. Of course, it's not always optimal. Sometimes we have to start adopting some other technologies that require a little bit more management from our side. But we try to limit our investment on that in that direction. Purely on the development tools. So if we look at the development process all the way to the release and management process, there are tools that can help us optimize along the way. Now, given that we've again narrowed down the scope to the absolute minimum that allows us to validate an idea, the next step is to start coding towards it. Based on people's preference for an IDE, there's plenty of tools that can help us with linting that code. This is a mechanism that prevents some very simple errors along the way. And I do encourage everyone on the team to use those. In case someone doesn't have their IDE configured properly or for some reason missed something, we also have static code analysis in our pipeline that catches those issues. Our pipeline currently is a combination of GitLab, and we also use code pipelines in AWS for two different types of workflows. Both of them have static code analysis. Both of them are integrated with a couple of services performing security type of analysis. Other tools that we use Terraform Cloud. We migrated to Terraform from CloudFormation about a year ago. And that seems to be paying off significantly when it comes to developer velocity. Just dealing with the CloudFormation was slowing us down a lot. And Terraform is a little bit easier to work with, a little bit easier to manage along the way. So definitely a tool that we like. it's working out for us.
Mhm.
And then we have a lot of automation in the later stages of the deployment and monitoring of those services. So the more we can automate, the more we can free developers from mundane tasks, and the more they can focus on value creation.
Right, right. Makes sense. Makes so much sense, Krikor. So, please expand more about like how you get the developer buy-in when you are like optimizing these processes. So, because every change has friction, and especially like one would be the change in terms to like introducing new process or tools. The other change could be new people joining your team, for example. So how do you manage that change management within the company for developer?
Certainly, to me, everything starts with the why of why are we building something, why are we making a certain change, being that a process, tooling, or anything else. As long as people understand the why, then the buy-in is easy. We don't have to sell them anything; they want it kind of naturally. And also, I always see this as a two-way street. I always see it as a conversation. The push for a change is not always coming from me, as often it's coming from just members of the team. And we all value different perspectives. And one of our core values is best idea wins. It doesn't matter where the idea comes from. As long as a person has a reason why something makes sense, we want to invest in it.
Cool. No, that's a good attitude for the team. Nice. Yeah, I think every developer would love that, being in that kind of setup. So, Krikor, like, how do you, because the technology, is always evolving and new practices or tools are always coming. So, what's your practice in terms of assessing any new development practice or tool, and then basically, like taking a decision whether to take it within your team or not. So how do you go about finding those right solutions for your team?
Certainly. So we can borrow maybe some nomenclature from Crossing the Chasm, pretty popular book from Jeff Moore. We are not necessarily early adopters, meaning we're not the first ones to jump on a brand new technology that hasn't been proven, that doesn't have an ecosystem of developers supporting it and answering questions. We're more of a late adopter, so more mature type of technologies. Also, when it comes to languages, we are not restricting ourselves to a certain language, but we try to balance that with the practicality of being able to recruit with people with knowledge in a certain language, and also looking again at the ecosystem that supports that tech stack. Are there a lot of open source libraries that we can leverage to achieve what we want to do? And so on. So to just sum it up, our company, for what we're trying to do, we're not on the bleeding edge of adopting brand new technologies. We're trying to adopt slightly more mature products and technologies. And the reason for that is it makes our lives easier and makes us more productive. Now, there's a lot of articles, there's a lot of support that we can get from the community, and that's a huge part of our assessment of a new tool, a new tech stack.
Right, makes sense. So my last question for today, Krikor, can you give any advice to developers or managers looking to improve developer velocity within their own teams?
Yeah, so you should definitely start with asking your team of what is adding the biggest friction to your day-to-day work. And don't necessarily take the first answer that you hear, but drill into that, understand why. So the 5 whys is another popular framework. Someone gives you an answer and you ask why 5 times until you really get to the root cause of the problem. In many cases, you would start in one spot and end up in a significantly different spot. So really diving deep and understanding where that friction is coming from is what I would advise. And then look for maybe some benchmarks outside of your team. Talk to some peers in the industry. Ask them how frequently they release. Ask them about other metrics that are important to you, just to get a sense of how you stack up against them, and whether it is an area that needs to be optimized or it's already pretty optimal, and your time is worth more if it's invested in a different direction.
Makes so much sense. Yeah. So thank you, Krikor. This has been a really relevating podcast, because I think it has so many takeaways for key managers and technical people who want to build better development, productivity, and velocity in their teams. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ayush. It's been a pleasure.